Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makpool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important topics. The first is, of course, the visit of the Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif to Uzbekistan, where he has, of course, met with important leaders on the sidelines of the SCO summit as well, including Russian President Vladimir Putin and also the Iranian leader. We know, of course, that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the meeting of the Council of Heads of State is an important one in terms of the discussions that are going to be held on a bilateral level and on a regional level as well, and the kind of impact it's going to have on issues with regards to these countries and the documentation that is going to be under review. However, the meetings on the sideline with the Russian president, the Iranian leadership and others is important also in terms of Pakistan's bilateral relationships with these two countries, in which we know that the Russian president Vladimir Putin has also suggested that the gas pipeline supply to Pakistan is possible, and also reiterated the fact that the infrastructure is already in place and that this is something that can actually be taken forward. So we'll be taking a look at what this preliminary discussion meant and how it can be taken forward as well, and moving beyond this particular meeting, what sort of a relationship is Pakistan and Russia going to have and evolve, and whether or not we will be able to finally materialize something out of this gas pipeline project. So that is going to be our first segment, where we'll be taking a look at the Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif's two-day visit to the SCO summit, and along with that, the meetings that are happening on the sidelines. We'll also, of course, be taking a look at the developing situation in the aftermath of the devastating floods that have affected more than one-third of the country and more than 33 million people. We keep seeing the reassessment of the damages that have occurred, and the initial flash appeal jointly put forward by Pakistan and the United Nations with regards to $160 billion is now something that is being spoken about as something which is not going to be enough and does not cater into account the needs according to the loss and damage that has occurred. We also know that there have been pledges of about 150, but so far about 38 million have been collected by various donors. This, of course, also points towards the scale of the damage and the kind of suffering that currently exists, especially in terms of the health crisis that is now prevailing in most parts of the affected areas. So we're going to be taking a look at the recent development and what needs to be done in this regard. A good development has been the launching of the online portal by the NCOC, which is going to be covering the latest statistics in terms of the damages and what's going on, which will be a first step forward to collecting data in a more organized manner and sharing it with the relevant agencies on ground as well. But in terms of the kind of appeal and help that Pakistan still needs and will need in the future, considering the economic, health and food security issues, is still there, and we need to talk more about that. So that's going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Patafi, and we've also been joined today in the studios by Dr. Ishtiyaq Ahmed, who's an author and academic. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiyaq, for being with us in the studio today. And we've also been joined online by Dr. Syed Muhammad Ali, professor at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you very much, Mr. Ali, for joining us and being a part of the debate. Let me start with you, Dr. Ishtiyaq. When we take a look at this visit of the Prime Minister, of course, the meeting with regards to the Council of the Heads of State and the SCO summit in general is also very important. But the big news, of course, is the meeting that has been held with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the talk and reference made with regards to the gas pipeline project that has been stalled for quite some time now. Moving forward, it seems so that according to the statement coming in from the Russian president, it's a possibility that can be further explored by Pakistan. How do you see this eventually becoming something real and tangible within the next few months?
Well, as you know that Pakistan, since 1991, when Central Asia was liberated from the Soviet Union, Pakistan has had this long desire to join this vast Muslim region with so much resources. So that desire has been fulfilled largely through Pakistan's membership of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And secondly, obviously, a byproduct of CPAC with China is also that our connectivity with Russia. So the second pillar of Pakistan's foreign policy, at least in Central Asia, has been to pursue or diversify its foreign relations with emerging powers. So one is China, another one is Russia. And as you know that we have been exploring multiple options since the 1990s. There was this Tapi pipeline project from Turkmenistan, but unfortunately because of the security situation in Afghanistan, it could not materialize so far. So this most recent proposal is this Russian gas pipeline, which obviously will face the same obstacle, which is why Pakistan's age-old desire of amicably resolving the Afghan conflict, not just for the sake of Pakistan, but for Afghanistan, for Central Asia, and for even for South Asia, is extremely important.
Right. Farooq, when we take a look at the SCO summit in itself and the importance that this holds in terms of what the Prime Minister is going to be attending, this is of course an important body which the Prime Minister also referred to in his tweets and talked about how it represents 40% of the world's interests, and this is something that holds value and should be a platform used to talk more about regional and bilateral issues. You also recently had the chance to interview the Secretary General of the SCO. Can you explain us a little bit about what the emphasis is currently in the SCO and the kind of scope that this body has in terms of bilateral and regional issues?
Right, Sana, and thank you very much for actually mentioning that I interviewed Yang Ming, who is the Secretary General of SCO, and he was very clear in actually highlighting the Shanghai spirit. All the member countries actually endorsed the idea of building an interconnected world, interconnected region, and the fact that this, half of the population, almost half of the population lies in this area. That also signifies a lot, right? I've been following SCO's creation and its evolution since day one, when it was Shanghai 5. And I remember the reason why it actually came into existence was the way the then Bush administration was behaving all over the world. At that time, the feeling actually spread that there should be a multipolar world order, and that there should be other countries that can take care of their own regions. So then, of course, Russia also gradually came back from the precipice, and we also saw that China actually finding its feet. Since then, these countries, first of all, initially it was merely these two countries and some Central Asian countries. But now the scope has broadened. Pakistan, India have also joined it. And then another country, a very important country, Iran, has just this year joined in as well. So we have to still wait and see what exactly can be delivered out of this. But I think that it is going to be quite a powerful bloc. There are two problems, of course. Since you were earlier talking about the pipeline between Russia and Pakistan, we have been talking about all these things for decades now. And now many of the skeptics call them pipe dreams because of Afghanistan, the way Afghanistan is broken, and the way various governments have not been able to help bridge the gap between Central Asia and Pakistan. Then, of course, there is a bull in China shop, that is India. India is a country that actually joined SCO just out of spite, because it very clearly wants to be the part of the Western order. And it is a part of Quad, it is part of so many other alliances or configurations where it wants to actually cancel out China and perhaps tolerate Russia's rise. Because of that, perhaps SCO is not pulling its weight, but in coming days we are hoping that we are going to see significant progress.
All right, I'll talk more about the SCO and of course the importance and significance it's going to hold with regards to regional and bilateral issues. But Dr. Ali, when we take a look at the Prime Minister's recent visit and his meeting so far, of course the meeting with the Russian president is an important one. You can also add in with regards to the SCO summit in general, but when we specifically talk about this particular relationship, it has been a source of much controversy at home as well. There is of course a lot of ways that this was interpreted, both within and outside of Pakistan, especially with regards to our relationship with the US. And this, of course, is a precarious balance for Pakistan to be able to maintain. How do you see us moving forward if we really want to take this ahead and evolve into a serious bilateral relationship where we have the gas pipeline project as well? How will we be able to balance that with our relationship with the United States?
Well, thank you for allowing me the opportunity of talking about it more broadly. I mean, I'll still weave in the Pakistan context into the broader analysis, but I think it's useful to step back and sort of to consider these issues from a 30,000-foot view, for instance. And the reason why I say that is that, I mean, look at the ironies of history, right? I mean, now we are at a juncture where we see some kind of Russian-Chinese alignment going on. It's not not a perfect symmetrical, convergence of interests. I mean, China has a differentiated approach towards the Russian intervention in Ukraine, and Russia has. I mean, it's the only time that Russia has conceded that there are concerns, legitimate concerns, Chinese concerns, because China doesn't perhaps want to be on the wrong side of history. But the irony here is that, in the past, we saw, and Pakistan, of course, played an instrumental role in that, when Henry Kissinger and in Nixon's era, where there was détente, right? And Pakistan was instrumental in trying to, broker that kind of détente between the US and China. And at that time, it was basically what was motivating the US was its Cold War with Russia. Now what we see is, increasing alignment between China and Russia, driven by the Chinese-American animosity. So, that's the broader framework within which some of this stuff is happening. But I agree that it's interesting, that we have countries. I mean, it's interesting, and it's also a challenge that, we have countries like Iran and India, which had been partners, in the past in Afghanistan. Now we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization had been talking. It didn't do a great job, by the way, all through the past 20 years when it was trying to broker some semblance of peace in Afghanistan. But Russia, of course, has now come back and wants to play a constructive role. And then we have now Pakistan trying to sort of balance this situation. It is an unfair world. I mean, the way that America reacts to India is much more patient than how dismissive America has been to Pakistan trying to walk a tightrope between its budding relations with Russia and having the US and being so dependent on the US, in its history. So I think that, I hope that from the last administration, the current administration is going to realize, and give value to sort of, to posturing, and how that posturing can be blown out of proportion in this unfair world, and be more nuanced in what it says, how it proceeds. And I have, of course, some ideas and suggestions, but I suspect you're gonna come back to me later.
Yes, and absolutely would love to hear more on that, because this is, of course, something that we keep talking about. But if you have an idea of how exactly that's going to be carried out, it will be wonderful to hear that. Dr. Ishtiaq, the idea of Russia playing a constructive role is also something that was highlighted in the meeting, and this has been said before as well. But in terms of what we have seen since the US troop withdrawal in Afghanistan and the way that currently things are happening within the Afghan territory, what sort of a constructive role can really be played by any other country, and then, of course, specifically Russia? What does that even mean?
Well, you see, the responsibility of maintaining and sustaining peace in Afghanistan lied on the shoulders of the United States, because it fought the forever war, and it has left behind a mess that obviously we have started to feel the pinch now. As far as the region is concerned, as you know, that Afghanistan for the past 40 years has had serious implications for all countries around it, and even beyond the immediate neighborhood, which is why China, Russia, Pakistan, other regional countries, our friends in the Gulf, and even for that matter the West in general, they have a shared interest. I think the interests converge when it comes to extremism and terrorism of all countries, big or small. So therefore, I think since Russia is not that far a country from us, and obviously Russia in its own sphere of influence is asserting, after 30 years of the Soviet fall. China is a rising economic power. You know, I spent quite some time today with Daniel Markey, who is a fellow based in Washington with the U.S. Institute of Peace. And my hunch is that the Americans actually are pushing the Chinese into war, and they are trying to create a new Cold War situation, expecting Pakistan to rejoin and other countries to rejoin this strictly binary proposition. I don't think that this is a reality. The reality is visible in the way SCO summit is unfolding right now, or the way this organization, a wonderful organization, has evolved in the past 20 years, which is that power in the international structure, at least since the end of the Cold War, has been increasingly diffused. Countries, there is no strict alliance here. Even for that matter, India, for instance, in May, President Biden created this Indo-Pacific economic framework. India has refused to join the trade leg of this new arrangement. India has been buying oil from Russia at cheaper rates. Gulf is neutral in the Ukraine war. China, obviously, this is the first time today, as Dr. Ali mentioned, that the Chinese have expressed some concerns over Russia's engagement in Ukraine, precisely because China adheres strictly to sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, because all of its problems lie in the periphery, just as most countries' problems are. So therefore, China upholds this principle very strictly. And obviously, we can debate the Russia's reasons for intervening in Ukraine, but again it's a violation of sovereignty. So there are interesting issues emerging. The world is not the same as we used to have back in the 80s or even in the post-Cold War period. It is much more fluid, it is much more complex, and there is complex interdependence that creates all these kinds of various convergences and divergences, and these things will move. So if the Americans expect the rest of the world, including Pakistan, to go back to the years of the 1950s or 60s or 70s, when there were strict alliances, the world was ideologically and economically divided, that will not be the case. We will also seek our own partnerships, be it with Russia, be it with China and other countries, and so is the case with India and other countries as well.
Right, absolutely. This is, of course, an important factor, Farooq, and I can sense that you want to add something, but you can do that and also add to my question. When we take a look at what Dr. Ishtaq has spoken about, we have talked about whether or not there is going to be a shift to something that had existed in the global arena in the past, and whether or not we're going to be taking a look at more binary way of alliances moving forward. There is, of course, a lot of different blocs and a lot of different bodies that have been emerging. But if we talk about how complex the situation is right now, or how different alliances exist, is that really something that Pakistan will be able to navigate itself through? Or do you think that, considering our economic and political situation, we'll have to form stronger alliances?
Yeah, yesterday, Sana, and I'm going to answer this question and of course add to the previous discussion as well. But yesterday, when we were talking about situations faced by Pakistan, I spoke about three paradoxes. One of those was Afghanistan, because withdrawing forces from Afghanistan was pretty easy for the US, because it was a foreign country and they could wind down their forces. But the act of leaving actually creates a paradox, because it is surrounded by important countries. Right? On one side, Russia is far abroad, and then you have China, then you have Iran, then you have Pakistan, and India is also there. So in all this mix, you won't find a way to fix Afghanistan, right? That's why I call it a paradox, and we are going to be affected the worst, right? A few years ago, there was a very interesting debate during the time of Donald Trump, when he started trashing the experts, that whether IR or international relations is a science or is it a pseudoscience. So somebody asked me, I said I would call it a technology, because you are trying to create something, right? So far, if you talk about the way things have been going on in the US and especially the Western, sphere of influence, you'll see that two things are connected. Rise of India as a lobbyist and also rehabilitation of Russia there and demonization of China. And both of all three of these things are actually connected with, Clash of Civilizations thesis that was presented by Huntington. Who was the publisher at that time? Fareed Zakaria of Foreign Affairs, right? And he is an Indian. So my humble submission is there is a project going on in which you actually try to ensure that somehow they decouple and they confront each other, the West and China. And I totally agree with Dr. Saab that decoupling in this age is totally impossible, because we saw Donald Trump actually trying exactly that through its trade wars. And what we saw in the end was that microchips disappeared from the world. And similarly, those who thought that China has the power to disengage and yet continue, we saw Huawei actually really suffering major losses as well as soon as it was banned by the US. So all these things are going on, and you have to understand that A, this world is very complicated. Secondly, there are a couple of paradoxes that if we are asked to pick and choose, we will actually, I don't think we have a way to navigate that. For example, a direct confrontation between China and the US will render us almost useless. Or for that matter, a hot war between Iran and Arab countries will kind of paralyze us, because one is neighbor, the others are so close allies, so it becomes paralyzing effect. But at this moment, I hope that if we don't actually give in to all these cliches created immediately after the Cold War, if we don't actually give in, perhaps we can create a better world. And what will define that, Sana? The only thing that is going to define it and redefine it, and I think that all these olden conceptions or straitjackets of Cold War are going to fall apart, is the rise of technology. The way it is renegotiating the entire world, I see it that the world is going to be better connected and more connected. Of course, there are going to be some strange kind of happenings like Russia invading Ukraine, but eventually that also will find an even keel and will find a way out of that as well. Yes, Sarah.
All right. Dr. Ali, considering, of course, the current situation that Pakistan is in now, with regards to political instability, the economic crisis that we're currently facing, and of course these devastating floods, it really puts us in a position where we're of course dealing with a lot of issues at home. There was a lot of discussion with regards to Pakistan's independent foreign policy in the recent political scenario, and especially with reference to our relationship with Russia as well. And then there was a lot of discussion as to what exactly does that even mean. Is that not something as a given for any country to actually have an independent foreign policy? So moving forward, when we take a look at our current political and economic situation and where we stand right now and what our options or our strength of our leverage may be, and then considering this emphasis on foreign policy issues and scenarios where we're dealing with multiple countries and choosing to have relationships with various countries, how is it that Pakistan will be able to move forward in the nuanced way that you were earlier mentioning and still sort of be able to keep its own national interest at the forefront?
Okay, so Sana, I mean, when I go in adjunct at Hopkins, for instance, when I'm teaching my courses there on South Asia, I think that we live in a world where we can have all these niceties and ambitions, but I mean, I don't know if I'm a realist, cutthroat realist myself, but I think realpolitik does still rule the world. So given conceding to that kind of reality, I think that after Uzbekistan, India is going to have the presidency of the SCO. Now, what Pakistan needs to do is, and Pakistan's not the biggest kid on the block, right, when it comes to Russia, India, and China. So I think Pakistan really needs to try and find common ground. Now, it's possible, and in this in this desire to find common ground, it can piggyback on Chinese interests as well. So, for instance, India, if it comes to the fore, it might, depending on what's going on, it's already pushed the envelope with the US in, in terms of getting Russian arms deals. But I think it's still interested in Chabahar. And it would be useful, I think, and also it will alleviate pressure from India if Pakistan, if China, and Iran, because the Iran nuclear deal is not going too well, right? So if there are 3 or 4 countries that come to an agreement versus just India and Iran, which is an easier act for the US to sabotage. And I think this is common ground, and there are possibilities, economic possibilities. Fine, it's a bit too close to Gwadar. It can be a rival port, but there could be possibilities that they are not rival ports. So I think that's one possibility. Earlier, the idea of counterterrorism, I think absolutely. I also agree. I think counterterrorism remains a possibility, because if you look at particularly the Islamic State, now, be it Iran, be it India, be it Afghanistan, the Taliban themselves, be it all the Central Asian states, be it Russia, be it the US, everyone has this common denominator, this jihadi group with global ambitions that is actually preventing the Taliban from being more diplomatic, because they fear that our hardliners are then going to go to the Islamic State because it says the Taliban have now sold out. So some kind of counterterrorism there. Then, when it comes to the Kashmir issue, I mean, if I'm sure you guys are also aware of, what has been happening. So besides revocation, subsequent to the revocation, now Modi's doing some political engineering, right? I mean, trying to give more seats to Jammu, and so given that reality, I think Pakistan has taken the situation as into the neutral zone as it can, by not, and there's no cross-border tension at the moment. I mean, it's still quite dangerous.
Ali Sahab, I'm glad that you actually brought up Kashmir and India-Pakistan relationship also. Don't you think that it is weird or strange that while so many leaders are together in one city under one roof, that Indian Prime Minister and Pakistani Prime Minister haven't met, or we haven't seen any reports of that?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Patafi, yeah. I mean, from what one has been hearing, but I'm frankly not surprised, given how Modi Sarkar is being at the moment, and there isn't a lot of permanence. I mean, he still is in a position because he's taken all these decisions that he wanted to take, and now, I mean, he has the mandate to bring about peace, to say the very least. But I don't know what kind of a mood he's in. But if I was on our side trying to look for realistic possibilities, what I would, say is, I mean, consider what happened with the COVID pandemic, right? I mean, that's the first time where India tried to use SARC to actually do something. Now, Pakistan was initially sort of involved in the process, but then pulled out, feeling that India was trying to be hegemonic. I think that the climate change, and I mean, I know that that's an issue we're going to discuss in more detail, but there are really, I mean, these are going to be long-term cross-border sources of tension, which are going to almost become uncontrollable. So, be it issues like the contamination of the Ravi, which has become the most populated, the most polluted river, and and some of that, the Hudiyara drain coming in from India is also polluting. Not that Pakistan's doing a great job with the Ravi, right? I mean, I think that if there's trying to work with India to try and see what are the possibilities with health cooperation at the regional level, right, on climate, on pollution. And lastly, I think that not only with, with India, but also with China. Right, I mean, when it comes to greening of CPEC, and because China is still pushing the BRI, right? I mean, I think there's a real possibility there where, I mean, if CPEC was to be the flagship of the BRI, and President Xi has announced that there's need for greening the BRI, then why not try and green CPEC, right?
Right.
And that is...
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we can take a look at that more. Yes, yes, Farooq.
Just one sentence. While I totally agree with the spirit, I think I wish wishes were horses. So we could also ride, because that doesn't seem to be happening.
Right.
And the biggest problem at this moment is when you talk about India, Pakistan and BRI, India is totally clearly opposed to BRI, even more than the US.
Right, and I wanted to come to Dr. Ishtiaq with regards to that, because Dr. Saab, you were shaking your head quite a bit while Dr. Ali was speaking, so I'm sure you have something to add to that. Can you please also explain what areas were that you were in disagreement with, and then we talk about specifically our options with regards to relations with India. Do you see the kind of possibilities that have been pointed out by Dr. Ali as something that can happen?
Well, I will basically build upon what Farooq just said. You see, the problem here is I wish that India could be ruled by Congress or other party. It should have had some secular, semi-democratic, tendency as it used to before. Unfortunately, we distracted from our national, destiny in 1979. And we spent the last 40 years in dealing with religious extremism and its serious implications as terrorism. India, unfortunately, in 2019 has entered the same era. Now, how long will it take? 10, 20, 30, 40 years, as long as we went through. So, the trajectory in the region, especially as far as the political evolution of the largest country, namely India, is concerned, it's not, like conducive. And that's very problematic, because in 2019, when they introduced a controversial Citizenship Act excluding Muslims, then there was a violence, against Muslim minority across India. And 2019 August, they dealt a blow to the Kashmir issue, because dividing, annexing it and then dividing it and then making it a part of the Indian Union. You see, that has really qualitatively changed the situation. Now, obviously, Pakistan, and even if you look at the last 30 years of different moves towards normalization of relations with India, Pakistan has been taking the initiative. Now, there is complete silence in the last 3+ years, and partly because India has committed the original sin, just as it did back in 1998 when it exploded the nuclear devices. So, what we are dealing with, obviously I agree with Ali, that there are certain, like value propositions that we can really market in the international community. One is counter-terrorism, where I think there is a convergence, complete convergence of interests. Second, obviously, this economic integration, and I think CPEC is all about economic integration. We wish that all countries in the region, including India as well, join the BRI, and I think we also, I personally consider that Indian-Chinese model of trade expansion, while at the same time conflicts are still intact. I think it's a very realistic model that Pakistan should try to emulate. But when it comes to South Asia, India is a large country as compared to others. Only Pakistan has withstood the Indian hegemonic designs in the past 75 years. No other country could do. So therefore, if you are a bigger actor, you have bigger responsibilities. That's the issue. So I think when the Indians are acquiring this presidency of SCO, once India and Pakistan joined the SCO, that was one way of actually resolving your bilateral disputes, because you are becoming a part of a large Eurasian organization,
Right.
which is, as you said in your opening, is half of the world population, is 40
almost,
plus,
yes.
and 30% of the world GDP. This is not a simple issue. So once you become a part of an organization which started from zero virtually, resolving the security conflicts. In the beginning, when SCO was created in 2001, I think if you read the articles published in Europe or America, everybody was saying that it is a new NATO emerging, It was again a binary proposition from the West, but it never, because all organizations in the end which are created in different regions get this broadly trade, economic, integration color, which is what SCO is all about. But SCO also deals with three evils, namely separatism, extremism and terrorism. It is a very, very successful organization, unlike the ASEAN or the GCC, which have a longer duration. In a matter of a couple of decades, this organization has become a power to reckon with. And I think Pakistan and India should use it an opportunity to normalize their relations. So besides economic integration and obviously counter-terrorism or conflict resolution, and I think one area where the entire world has a pragmatic interest, I'm not talking about any kind of a moralism here, altruism, but a pragmatic interest is to deal with the implications of the climate change. Pakistan is at the center of it.
Absolutely.
This year alone we have seen all kinds of effects, heat waves, drought, now floods. So this is an opportunity for every country, America, because if we go down, everyone else will go down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is, of course, important to remember when we're talking about the global response to climate change as well. And we'll talk more about that in our next segment. But Farooq, before we do that, my last question with regards to this segment would be, when we talk about the SCO significance, I understand the kind of a history and importance of the organization that Dr. Ishtaq was pointing out. But inherently, of course, I want to understand the kind of impact and significance that this body holds also in relation to other bodies, since we have many other as well. And then in terms of actual tangible action or accountability or implementation, what sort of value do you think it will hold? And you have spoken to the Secretary General. So when we talk about the new Secretary General, or this being an Indian, what sort of an influence or power or portfolio do you think that this position holds in terms of how it can impact relationships and dynamics in the world?
No, I think you realize that Secretary General has just been appointed, and it is for a long time. India is going to chair it. That is a different story.
Right.
But regarding the way, earlier, actually, I mentioned the interview, you mentioned the interview, and then I spoke about the Shanghai spirit. And at that time, I also asked him whether SCO can play any role in building bridges between India and Pakistan, particularly Kashmir issue. And he said that SCO's mandate actually stops it from actually taking sides or positions on any dispute between the member countries, particularly not only Kashmir, but China, India, border dispute as well. So at this moment, I think SCO can always double down on any kind of common interest there are, and I think there are many, but it won't be able to actually force two members to actually totally solve their disputes that they will have to do individually. And earlier we were talking about India, Pakistan. Can I also, slip in an anecdote?
Go ahead. Yes.
Recently, I was having a conversation with an Indian Congressite, right? And he actually claimed that Narendra Modi is karma's way of punishing Pakistan for taking Congress lightly. And I said that maybe it is, karma's way of punishing India for actually Congress for taking Indian people lightly, right? Congress was the one that created all these problems. I understand that we have been hearing for quite some time that if BJP is in power, perhaps there can be a resolution of disputes. We heard it in 2014, we heard it in 2019, despite the fact that we were confronting each other at that time also. But if there is any hope or there is a chance, I want to actually I want that miracle to come true very soon, because climate crisis is not merely focused on Pakistan alone. Remember that eighth position that we keep on talking about, and other countries being almost very small countries, and that's why Pakistan is going to bear the real brunt. India shares that position with Pakistan. In coming days, you are going to see that winters are going to be harsher in India as well, and summers are going to be unbearable. In that kind of a state of affairs, I think India and Pakistan are supposed to be allies. And I keep on saying this, that perhaps someday somebody in South Block or perhaps Modi's house are going to realize that enough is enough and they should be building bridges. I hope it does, because in 2024, when they are going to face the electorate again, this time no Pulwama can save them. This time they'll have to go in the other direction, because that card has been played, jingoism card. This time they'll have to go for peace dividend. And I think that now they are moving in that direction. I would have been very happy if Indian Prime Minister and Pakistani Prime Minister would have met at the sidelines of SCO, and that actually tells you the limitations of all these bodies. And somehow we keep on actually looking at these abstractions. Remember, it came into power or existence at a different time. Bush administration was very different from Biden administration, or for that matter even Trump administration. Because of that, a lot of things in which it is involved, SCO it is still adapting. Right. I don't think there is going to be any counter NATO here, in Eastern NATO here. But what we are going to see is these regions can work together, and let's hope that happens in coming days.
Absolutely. Since we're short on time, we're going to quickly move on to our next segment as well and take a look at the flood situation at the moment and the kind of activities in terms of rescue and relief that have been going on. Dr. Ali, the UN Secretary General, when he came to Pakistan, spoke about how he has not seen climate carnage at this level, and this is something which is of course shocking, and the humanitarian crisis in this scale is huge. Perhaps that is still not understood fully by our international partners. There is of course a pledge that has been made. There is a massive appeal that has been put forward by Pakistan and the UN. There is a lot of aid coming in, but it's still not enough in terms of the scale of damage. And then there's of course the question of donor fatigue that also keeps coming up, and now we also of course know that the Prime Minister also referred to how the countries, even the friendly countries, when it comes to the relationship with Pakistan, are looking at the country in terms of somebody who's always asking for more money, and that seems to be the relationship dynamic that exists with most of our countries now. So considering all of the situation and our economic situation and the huge scale of catastrophe that we're dealing with, how do we ensure that when we talk about the climate change issues and the countries that are responsible for it, for them to be able to do better, since the UN Secretary General kept on emphasizing that this is justice and not help, but that doesn't seem to translate into action yet.
Again, I mean, there's a lot of justice to be had. I mean, from from centuries of slavery to resource extraction. Yes. So I mean, while that is there, but I still think that there are untapped possibilities. I mean, I remember in 2010, I was doing work for the ILO, and this is post the first major super floods we had. Right, and there were a lot of lessons that within Pakistan, I think it is still unfair, when I hear think tanks here, because they kind of do this convenient oscillation. Half of it is Pakistan's mismanagement, and the other half is it's climate change. But I think that it is certainly not half, because I mean Pakistan's ecological footprint is 0.5%. No credit to Pakistan. I mean, it's just because of the size of our economy. Yes, there's been some efforts for addressing the forestation issue, but other than that, I mean, in terms of using coal for our energy mix, in terms of the kinds of housing projects, it's not like Pakistan is on the cutting edge of ecological preservation. We are not. But nonetheless, I mean, a country that is on the top 10 hit list and is contributing less than 1% of, ecological damage should be given, more support than that measly 150 million for sure, that commitment. Right. However, just last point is that I think when we are calling for environmental justice, we should not only be looking at the West. I mean, look at who are the largest emitters. I mean, it's the US, China, and India. So why not ask for environmental justice from our dear neighbor and dear friend as well? I mean, which calls for greening of CPAC.
Absolutely. This is, of course, important. Dr. Ishtiaq, there is, of course, the issue of calling out to the global contributors, but there's also a lot that needs to be done at home, both in terms of our prevention, our strategies in response to such disasters, and, of course, our contributions to carbon emission. Do you think that, of course, we're dealing with the situation right now with regards to floods, but do you think in general Pakistan has laid emphasis on these issues and will be able to do that since we're still going to be one of the most vulnerable countries?
Well, you see, the thing is, if we look a little bit inwardly, there is a lot to, hold account for, simply speaking. I agree with Ali that, the bulk of the main reason why these things are happening is because of the exploitation of the nature, by these industrialized countries. And they polluted the air. And so the responsibility lies there. But again, in our case as well, you see, we had floods 12 years ago as well, but did we take any tangible measures or not? Did we become more climate conscious? Did we prevent illegal, encroachments in these rivers up north? No. Did we build, say, earthquake resistance structures? Where is it? So there is an acute, governance crisis in Pakistan. There is a lack of responsibility here, and I think we need to acknowledge that as well.
Absolutely, that's important. Sorry to interrupt, but we're unfortunately very short on time. Farooq, you have 10 seconds to add something.
Yes. I don't think I will be able to do justice. I very
Go
quickly
ahead.
wanted
Yes.
to actually connect one thing that you have been saying, donor fatigue, or
Yes.
for that matter, incoming recession. I don't think that is a factor. I think the right word you are looking for is Pakistan fatigue. And I tell you what Pakistan, not the one we live in, but the Pakistan that exists in the West mind because of 20 years of media propaganda and our failures as well.
Right.
Because of that, Rubin has actually written an article on Pakistan's incoming collapse. But the humble submission is that is, I think, premature, and their imagination might be such that we are going to collapse. That's why perhaps they are waiting to see what becomes of it. That's why IMF also creates problems. But in coming days, I tell you, A, this country has defied all such predictions. Secondly, if, for God forbid, we were to collapse, our ghost would be far more haunting and daunting than whatever.
And we really
have.
hope that is not the case.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Farooq Wadafi, Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, and Mr. Saeed Mohammed Ali for joining us and being a part of the debate. That's all we have. We'll see you tomorrow.